Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast. On today's episode, my conversation with Katie Ravenwood. Katie is a professional musician and a public health data scientist. She has taught and performed music in the Washington, D.C. area for more than 20 years. In this conversation, we talk about all things public health and data, education in music, and how to cook a perfect pork roast. So please enjoy my conversation with Katie Ravenwood. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. As you know, but I will also tell the audience, you were one of the very first people that I had on my list of guests because you're amazing and because I want an excuse to hang out with you. And because when I first dreamed of this podcast, you were going through a career transition and actually going to work in the field of public health. Mm-hmm. So I was super excited to sit down and chat with you about that. And I remain excited. And here we are. We manifested it. But I want to start back a little bit. First, I want to know, because I don't know somehow, how you ended up in the D.C. area, because you are a Southern girl. You are a transplant.
In fact.
So where are you from?
I am from Alabama originally. We're just south of Birmingham. It's a little town called Pelham. And I grew up there. It's very sort of, everything you think about Alabama, football and barbecue and all those things. And I love it. I love going back there. I go back there really regularly to see my family. They all live there. But
I do think football.
What?
Like football. Like, why is football so Alabama? Why is that what I think, even though I know nothing else about it?
I could very easily kind of drop into the stereotype and say because there's nothing else to do, because that's what everybody kind of wants to say.
Yeah.
But there's something so like intrinsic and gut level about football there, because really there is everything is based on college football there. Like you're either an Auburn fan or an Alabama fan. And, even if you didn't go to either of those schools, you kind of have to pick a side. And it's like this whole big community thing. Everybody goes into, watching football. They all talk about it. That's the water cooler stuff at the grocery store. I mean, I can't even tell you, even now, I wear Alabama things. I only went there briefly at the beginning of my college career. But I'll wear an Alabama hat to the grocery store here in Maryland. And literally, I'll come around the aisle and some dude will be like, "Roll Tide." I'm like, I love this. I'm not even in Alabama, and this is great. So it's this huge community building thing.
Yeah.
Like my whole family has, periods where they've gotten together to watch football together. Like my sister has a whole group of people that she gets together and watch games with, like this group of moms and all the kids, and they have a good time. It's every week. And it's sort of a nice point of community outside of, some other different things where they can kind of access that. Yeah. And you always know you have something in common to talk to somebody about, because you're probably going to be able to talk about football with somebody.
So at what age could you have understood a football game? I mean, is this from a very young age you're watching it?
6 or 7.
Wow. Yeah.
In our house, we didn't just watch the game of our team, which when I was a child was Auburn, because my dad is an engineer and went to Auburn. War Eagle. I'm
getting a lot of mixed messages here.
I know, it's terrible. Oh, believe me, the shift happened. When it happened later, it was like an earthquake. It was not. It was like everyone was so verklempt about it. Like, you're going where? But
the family fell apart. How could you do this to us? You're gonna Roll Tide?
I have all these little baby shirts from when I was a kid. Aww. These little I'm a tiger too, and all these things. And then I decided to go to Alabama, and it was my father was very excellent about it. He said not one word. But we would watch football games, and so every Saturday that's what happened in the house. And it was not any kind of mandate. It's just everybody sat around and did that. And so they would be broadcast on TV, and we would see the Alabama game and the Auburn game, and sometimes whatever other SEC team was around or playing at a reasonable time. And we would just sit there. And so, of course, my dad, who was a super enthusiastic football fan, would sit there and cheer and, yell at the TV. And, the guy's going to get the tackle. And he's like, get him, get him, get him. And we're like, what is he talking about? So we'd be like, Dad, what did he do? And he's like, oh, he went there. They had to tackle him because he was about to get a touchdown. Dad, what's a touchdown? And so by 5 or 6 years old, you're watching it and you're doing the same things, so you're watching him and what's about to happen. So you go to a football game, and if you go to a game there, it's hilarious to watch all the fans in the stands, because even the tiny ones are watching it's about to be a football game, and they're up on their seats yeah, it's the cutest thing. So,
and that's how language is learned, and that's how culture is and traditions are passed on.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
You cheated on your home family's school. You found a new school, and then you really cheated and you moved north and ended up in the DC area of all places. So tell me about that journey.
So that, shockingly enough, that has to do with football too. When I was in high school, I had a really great band program. One of the best band directors, I will talk about him endlessly, always, Jim Duran. He was really, really an excellent music teacher. And I started when I was in middle school, of course, because you go, okay, are you going to be like, it's not like you have to choose sports or music, but, kind of falls out that way a little bit. Mm-hmm. And my best friend from across the street came across the street and said, she had this beat up old box. And she's like, hey, so I'm going to be in the band and I'm going to play the clarinet and you have to do it too. I mean, there was no option. And she opens it up and it's her dad's clarinet from when he was in the marching band at Auburn. And it's like, all beat up, but it's her dad's. It's great. And she was we were BFFs, so we had to go everywhere together, clearly. So I was like, went inside and, Mom, I have to be in band. She's like, yeah, okay, cool, pivot, whatever. I've been playing piano for, probably 3 or 4 years at that point. Pivot, like, you want to be a clarinet player? All right, fine. So, joined the band, met this band director, and there's a great band culture there because, of course, there's marching band for football and there's all this other stuff. So there's no orchestra in schools there. So you're either a wind player or you're not, Oh,
interesting.
And so I joined the band, and I was fortunate that my band director went to my church. I grew up, and that's also part of the culture there. Church is a very big deal. That's how most people experience community outside of football.
Right.
And he led what was called the church orchestra. We actually had a band that played every Sunday. Before praise bands were like a big thing, like they put this together. And he, as this little baby 6th grader, was like, I want you to come play in the church band. Oh, I was so terrible. I was squeaking all the time, and, bless him. But he was just like, it's awesome. And he would give me like little lessons like, okay, we'll do this with your fingers. And it's a little better. I was out of tune. He didn't care. But so I was doing that at church. I was in band, and he was really funny. And you grow this community of people in band. And I just kind of moved into the idea that I wanted to be a musician. Like I knew when I was probably a freshman in high school that I wanted to be a serious musician. So I started thinking about it, and I had this little group of friends who also wanted to do that same thing. So one of the best music schools in Alabama is University of Alabama, of course, the direct rival to my dad's school.
Of course.
And they had an amazing wind ensemble program and an orchestra program there. And I had auditioned there, got a full scholarship. Like, it was great. I'm like, yes, going to go to music school there. And so, decided to go to Alabama. Of course, like I said, my dad said nothing about this. Like
a full ride is a full ride.
For real. Like, he was like, this is great. You do what you want. And, they have been phenomenally supportive of me my entire life of being a musician. I mean, never one negative word. Wow. Which is more than I can say for a lot of people, even though they knew it was going to be difficult, like, they have always expressed ultimate faith and support in what I've done. It's been really fabulous. So, I go off to school, and as I'm there, I'm kind of going, okay, well, I like it here, but I don't really want to be here. I needed to be somewhere else, like out of that community, because I kind of realized pretty early that I was a big square peg in that round hole of the community, and I needed to maybe be somewhere else. And so when I was in my sophomore year, I met the clarinet teacher at Arizona State University, Bob Spring, and immediately was just like, this guy knows what's up. Like, I want to study with him. He's so excited about playing music. He had a way of communicating, even in like the smallest things, like how, to be passionate, how to communicate, how to really make it a way to speak to other people. And so I knew I kind of wanted to leave. I was kind of not feeling the University of Alabama. As much as I love them, they're great, they're fabulous, and still a phenomenal, school. So I decided to go there, and I transferred and
to Arizona State.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now even further away from Washington D.C.
So I was all the way cheating.
The mystery.
All
You're
the way
just
out. I'm
like,
into NFL football territory. It's bad.
Oh my gosh! Look at you, Grand Canyon.
I know.
Mountains.
So far away.
Cacti.
Yeah, my dad drove me out there the first time. And bless Dad, he drove me out there, and he had to drop me off, and we barely found me a place to live. It was so last minute, and he's having to leave me, and I had to go to do my piano test for school, and he was going to get on a flight and leave, and he's hugging me, and he's crying. He's like, I'm leaving my child out here. And I'm like, this is the first time I've ever seen my dad cry ever, and he's like, you're so far away. And I was like, it'll be all right, Dad. I go out the door, and I'm like, here I am far away from everyone. So I have to back up because actually that's not the reason I ended up here. I went to Arizona first, but then when I was in high school at band camp,
This one time
at
band camp?
indeed, I met a guy who became my first husband.
Ah.
Later on, spoiler. But I met him when I was in high school at band camp, and
Wow.
we sort of had this little rocky correspondence. This was before email was like really a thing. So we
Right.
actually
Pen
sent
pals?
letters,
Oh my God.
like
look
little
at
Christmas
you.
presents. Like he sent me a sweater for Christmas. It was so cute.
So romantic.
You know, and he was like very, very dashing, good-looking trumpet player.
Absolute husband material. Ooh,
Yes.
trumpet?
And it was terrible. Like I knew the minute that I met him, it was awful. I was like, and you know, you have that. I had that realization, and I was like, "This is the guy you're going to marry." And I was like, "What's it?" I didn't talk to him for like 2 more weeks. I was like, no.
Terrifying.
I have other things I need to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, he lived here. I was going on whatever little path I was going on, not even thinking about it, you know, and just random like letters back and forth. And when I got to school at Arizona, we both decided to go back to the same camp in the summer. And kind of solidified the whole long distance relationship and ended up getting married after I was done with college. And he lived here. He was in grad school at University of Maryland. So, yeah.
Wow. So first of all, so many things have already come up for me. I'm like,
You have so many questions.
is the whole reason that I've been seeking community my whole life because I never had football or church? I mean, it's all becoming so clear. Like, I was just robbed of community because there was no football and no church. So putting that on my list, you know, things my children might need.
You can find community in lots of other ways, and there are insidious aspects as well. But
It's true. It's
you
true.
know.
But it's nice. I do value when communities have that structure.
Mhm.
And I do think that there's something to be said, of course, for finding many ways to build community. And I, no joke, have spent my entire life seeking it and building it. But I think it's very interesting when a community is formed around shared interests, shared values. And I think that even though obviously it's flawed, it can be flawed, I think it's beautiful too. And I think it's nice to be able to look back on that and see the ways in which it was good, even if we all know many of the ways in which those institutions are challenging. I also love that the word pivot came up already with your mom saying, sure, at age, 8 or whatever, go ahead and pivot from piano to clarinet because when I first wrote down what I wanted to talk to you about, I had the word pivot right there, talking about pivots. And then I love the winding path, the ending up here for a man.
Right.
A man that we're not even hanging out anymore, but like he brought you here and here you are.
Well, and to be fair, I was this hotshot little clarinet player, at this point I'm auditioning for all these orchestras and doing all this. I'm originally an orchestral person, and I do a lot of more different things now. But I had sort of, auditioned. I was on the sub list for the opera here in different places and, played with the union, all these different orchestras. We have tons of them around D.C. So, when I moved here, I sort of immediately started moving in that circle and doing all the work here. And that was good, too. I just knew, it's not to be like, it wasn't about the man. It was totally about the man. But also, it was a good career move because it's a big city. There was a lot of things to do here. I knew that I would be able to work here, really well.
If you're going to move for a man, it doesn't hurt to move to a great city.
Yeah.
With a very robust paid music community.
Right.
I mean, if you had to move for a man somewhere,
right?
Why not here? It's like here or New York. Why not? By the way, did you like Arizona State? Like, did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it's one of the more. It's really bizarre because it's in the middle of Phoenix, and people don't think of it as a really beautiful place, but I find it really beautiful. And there's a common experience that a lot of people I knew then, and since then I've heard it from a lot of other people, have when they move there. They go to school, especially those of us that have been in places that are very lush and green and there's lots of trees. And you go, and after a few months, you start to dream about greenness and trees and plant life because everything there is orange and pink and brown. There's no green. You have to drive to the northern part of the state or somewhere in California really to get any greenness at all. Like Phoenix is sort of in the middle of the state, and you can drive up to the north to go skiing, and there's lots of trees, Grand Canyon and everything, Flagstaff. And everybody that I talked to, I got to about October. I got there in August, and I got there in October. And I started actually having dreams literally about hugging trees. And everybody was like, you need to go to the Grand Canyon. You'll be fine after you do that. And I'm not woo about any of this kind of stuff, but I was like, fine. So we'll go hiking. It's October. It's beautiful. Whatever. It's the mountains. The leaves are changing. Whatever. Because there are no seasons in Phoenix.
Right.
It's hot or more hot. So
and
I
dry.
go up there.
Don't forget dry.
And dry. Thoughts about that too, because they decided to put a lake in the middle of downtown Tempe.
Very sustainable.
Yes, it's
easy to maintain.
It was fun to be on the crew team for Arizona State too, because there was no water. So the practices in the morning were all ergs. It was
wow.
It was a mess. So, but I went to the Grand Canyon. I had been just frantically dreaming about trees and hiking in places with lots of lushness. Alabama is very huge pine trees and lots of forest and mountains, and so at least where I grew up in Alabama. And it was bizarre. I went hiking on this beautiful hike, stayed there all weekend, came home. I was good after that.
The dream stopped.
It was so bizarre. I've heard this from several people that they say you have to go out of it and have an experience of it and come back in, and then you're like, oh, okay, the pinkness, the brownness, the dryness, the cacti, I'm good.
I am going to have to look into that later because that is fascinating.
Yeah.
I also have to interject here and say that I almost went to Arizona State.
Did you?
I had a thing for Arizona because my grandparents lived there, so it was a fun place for me, right? I only ever went there in the context of vacation, grandma and grandpa, dining out, so I loved it. I applied to Arizona State School of Journalism. I was going to go to the Walter Cronkite School of Broadcast Journalism,
Yeah.
do this basically.
Clearly.
And
you're meant for it.
I was ready and I went and I visited. I loved it. And then I stayed on the East Coast for a man, basically,
Yeah.
because my high school boyfriend was going to Syracuse and I got into Cornell and it was those are really close together. And if I go to Arizona, we'll have to break up and
people have made decisions for worse reasons. And,
choices made for men, but no regrets.
Yeah.
No regrets.
The winding path.
Everything winds around and comes back to just where you want it to be. And here we are. So I want to talk about, you came to the DC area, maybe for a man, maybe for music. We're going to say both. We're going to say for fated reasons. But you did become a musician. And then that has been mainly your career for the last 1 million years. So
25.
tell me, 25 years.
Yeah,
So
25
tell
years.
me about that. Tell me about just being, finding your footing as a working musician, kind of figuring out what lane you maybe wanted to occupy more or less, and then also how you started teaching.
Oh, yeah. Well, so it's interesting because you sort of phrased it as I came out of college and I became a musician. I actually put it really differently. I was a musician before I got to college.
Right.
I played my first paid gig when I was 15, and it was a musical of all things. And
you were in the pit?
I was in the pit. And don't forget, I was doing church musicals. Now down there where I grew up, the churches, I grew up in a really large mega church. And we would have those big Easter spectacles that are musicals full on with a full on depicted crucifixion and the whole nine.
Oh, boy.
I have video of this. It is spectacularly interesting.
Haunting.
Yeah. But really also the choir was this 350 person choir, and it was spectacular.
So
You'd play these
powerful.
anthems with them every Sunday morning with this band, and I was bitten by the bug by the time I was in the 7th grade because it's just exhilarating. You get up there and there's this beautiful music. So down there, all the ensembles and things are pretty spread out and kind of few and far between. You have to drive pretty far, and most people play in many different places. And the churches will often hire people to play church gigs and things. So I started doing that when I was 15 or 16 years old. And, so I started doing gigs then, and I had to start managing my finances. And I had a really smart teacher who said, you should start learning how to teach people, when I was in high school. So I had my first clarinet student when I was 16.
Aww.
And she's still my friend on Facebook. She just got married last week, I think.
Oh, yay.
So super sweet, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to learn how to teach really early. So I actually got to college already having a clarinet studio of kids that I had been teaching. And got there, taught all through school. And teaching is absolutely a learned skill. You start teaching music, I know a lot of people that come out of school and they sort of drop into having to teach private lessons. If they haven't done it in school, maybe one of the things that you have to do when you are in school for music is a lot of times you'll take a pedagogy class or something that teaches you kind of how to teach. But what they'll do is throw you into like a lesson or maybe observe one that you're already teaching, and they give you have to observe other people, and you kind of think, oh, okay, well, this is how teaching works. And then you get into it and you go, oh no, this is so different.
There are real humans here. It's terrible.
There are real humans here. I need to learn how to explain the same thing 8 different ways, which is a real thing.
Yeah.
But so I was already teaching students. By the time I left college there in Arizona, I had a studio of 35 kids.
Wow.
That I passed on to other people when I left.
Wow.
And so I was already doing it, and I knew how to build a studio. So when I moved here, unlike a lot of people who get out of college and have never done this, they drop into, into an office job or something different to kind of make money until they build it up. I literally came here, put up flyers in Safeway, and had 60 students within 3 weeks.
Wow.
And so, my former husband was like, can you teach me how to do this? How does this work? And I was driving everywhere. My poor car. I had so many miles on my car. And if you've ever had to drive around the DC Beltway at rush hour, I don't recommend it. But yeah, so I kind of came out and was doing that. And then, you sort of start to try to pick up your performing career a little bit. And it's sort of about who you know. And, what you have to be able to jump on an opportunity as soon as it comes your way. Because the way to kind of break into, at least here at the time, was somebody had to know that you could play and there had to be an emergency, So I was really fortunate. My husband, of course, was a working trumpet player, and I had joined the union. I did the whole thing. Actually, I think I joined the union when I got this gig. He was playing a gig at the National Cathedral. It was fabulous. It was I even remember the piece. It was Belshazzar's Feast by William Walton. It's an amazing piece. But they needed a bass clarinet player, and there are not that many people that even relatively now own their own bass clarinet. Certainly not back then, 20 years ago. And the contractor was like, oh, this is a bass clarinet player. Like they can't do it now. And now we got to find somebody. He literally is standing, he pipes up. He's like, my wife is a bass clarinet player. You should hire her, and she was like, well, what's she done? And he sort of tots out my resume, and she's like, well, fine, we'll give her a tryout. So I go there and I'm this little baby clarinet player, with all these heavy duty people that are playing this concert. And, I showed up and practiced frantically before I got there and showed up and was able to do it. And everybody was kind of like, yeah, okay, you're in. So then you kind of take gigs as people call you. They're, again, for the first few years, it's always some emergency, that somebody has. But you start playing a lot of varied things. I've played, orchestras and operas and recitals and all kinds of things. And it gives you the opportunity to sort of see what things you like and don't like, which is kind of great. And I sort of began to realize, again, on an emergency basis, somebody called me to play at Toby's Dinner Theater in Columbia. If you've never been there, it's a little, theater in the round, and it's classic dinner theater. You have your dinner, and then show is right there. And they're unusual in that they do shows year round, 52 weeks a year. I shouldn't say 365 days because that's not true. But they've been there for almost, I think, 50 years.
Wow.
And again, they had an emergency. They needed a clarinet player, and the guy was just like, it's saxophone and flute too, but I don't even care. We just need somebody. So I got to go in there, and I was able to learn on the job how to be a theater musician. They were like, get a flute, try this part. It's literally one note. I know you probably can't play it, but that's fine. And they were very kind. Toby Orenstein, who owns the theater, is very kind in letting people work into the job and move into, different things, and very supportive. So I ended up doing that, and all of a sudden I'm now adding a theater musician in addition to opera clarinetist and orchestra musician, and so
as I'm hearing you list all of this, one of the topics that I've discussed on a previous episode is burnout. And something that I talked about on another previous episode is when you're a musician and you teach all week, and so you're very cerebral about music all week, then it can sometimes burn you out for when you have to still have the energy to perform. So how did you navigate that? How do you still navigate that maybe? But it sounds like during this time when you were really building it up and maybe you felt like you couldn't say no to things as they came up, how did you stay in it? How did you not burn out as you're juggling 60 students and a variety of gigs that are coming at you from all over the place?
It's really fascinating because music is wonderful and insidious at the same time, because that you need to be doing a lot of this work. You have to be out working in order to get work, and to turn down work is terrifying, because if you turn somebody down, there are people who, if you turn them down once, they will never call you again. And so it's kind of not a choice. for a lot of people, and never mind the financial implications of however much you're getting paid. You're having to take whatever it is that you can take to, make a paycheck. But especially when you're first starting out, you don't really, it's a little bit like the frog in boiling water, right? Like the story everybody always tells, it gets hotter and hotter and you don't realize it until you're really just operating at that temperature all the time and it's normal. So it was really fascinating when the COVID shutdown, of course, was pivotal for a lot of people.
Right.
But for a lot of people that I know, a lot of musicians and actors and other people, we all of a sudden became very aware of the temperature when we were not allowed to go out anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, you realize that you're just operating at this pace. Like, I'm fond of the joke now that everybody, when I was pivoting into like a 9-to-5 job, they were going, oh, well, it's an office job. You're going to have to work 40 hours a week. Do you think you can do that? I'm like, do you not understand that my normal week has been 90 hours a week?
Yeah, I was going to say,
like all
it's
the
going to
time.
be very boring.
Yeah, like this
what
is
will
like,
I do
I'm
with
like,
the other 50 hours?
For real. I'm like, I had hobbies like when at some point, but in the past, like maybe 5 years before COVID, I had not done any of them because I was always working and I loved what I did. It was great. But I'm like, I have time for knitting and I have watched TV, and now what do I do on a Sunday that I not
Heaven
actually
forbid you
gigs?
see your family.
Dear Lord.
Do you and your husband actually have full-length conversations now?
We do, but we still have to build them in.
It's a work in progress, folks.
That's right. But but we also, this is not round one for either of us.
Right.
So, my current husband and I, we build that in because we know that's important, and we make time for it on purpose because if we don't, we know that it'll just be like, we'll just never see each other. And
right.
we also know what that was like. That's another byproduct of COVID, to be fair, because we were I would be in and out. I started my work day at like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, some days 7 in the morning, going to school and teaching all day and then playing shows at night. But I never would get home until like 11 or 11:30. And so we got in the habit of, he would take a nap when he came home. He's a teacher. And he would take a nap when he came home from school so that he could be awake with me for like an hour or 45 minutes. And then, I would wake up at like 6:15 in the morning when he would wake up, and we would sit and like, I would say bye, or something. But then we wouldn't really see each other except for like in between times, and we'd text each other a lot. And that was the whole first year of our marriage. And then COVID shut everything down. And we got into the habit of waking up together in the morning and having a cup of coffee and sitting and talking to each other for an hour. And before we had to be on, because, I was teaching remotely and he was teaching remotely. And then at night, everything was shut down. We didn't have any shows or no concerts. So, we would sit and we would watch a TV show together and like, do something silly and then go to bed. And we were like, this is amazing. When we started coming out of COVID, like we were like, this part we are preserving. Yeah. Because this connection and communication made such a difference in our relationship. And we preserve that at all costs. Like, we don't care how much sleep is in the middle of the night. We always wake up at the 6:15, have the coffee. He stays up, even now when I have shows at night, he'll do the nap thing, which is not very often. I pace it now more than I used to. But he'll stay up and we'll have our little one episode of TV and like go to sleep. And it's so delightful. And we see each other a lot more than we used to because I'm not having to run around as much as I used to do.
Yeah.
But
I love that. I mean, for many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
First, I love stories of silver linings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people found some silver linings during
Mm-hmm.
the COVID shutdowns, especially like you're saying, entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
performers, people who were just go, 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 go,
Mm-hmm.
and were forced to suddenly stop. Whether or not that ended up being a good thing, it at least was a time to examine.
It made you pay attention to it.
It made you pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you decided was you missed that pace, then
Mm-hmm.
great.
Right.
You
Then
get to
good.
go back to it
Yeah.
when it comes back. But I think a lot of people did realize maybe they were burning the candle at both
Mm-hmm.
ends and it was time to find some balance. And then I also love, you're saying it's not the first go for either of you, but
Mm-hmm.
for anyone, whether or not it's their first or second or not even yet a marriage,
Mm-hmm.
just to have that realization that relationships, even friendships,
Mm-hmm.
take maintenance
Mm-hmm.
and communication is key. So, we were joking earlier that we hang out once a year and we like each other.
Right.
But that's just the pace that we're on.
And we have to schedule it ahead of time.
And we have to schedule it, and it's formal.
Right.
Sometimes we even have to record it.
I mean, I like this.
You
This is
do what
great.
you got to do to make a
Right.
friendship work. But relationships do take work.
Mhm.
And I know, when I had my first adult relationship when I was 17 or whatever,
Mhm.
I definitely didn't think about that. I definitely
Mhm.
wasn't thinking like, am I communicating my feelings? Am
Mhm.
I making time for this person? So I don't know if you're a fan of like love languages,
Yeah,
but
we talk about that a lot.
framework, so helpful. Like whether or not, each person neatly fits into one category or not. I think we're all blends, right? But just to be able to
Mhm.
use that language of like, hey, I would really feel seen today through like an act of service. Like you're
Mhm.
doing a great job like affirming me and thank you, but like if you could like wash the dishes, that'd be
Mhm.
so great. Like I would feel
Yeah.
way more loved if you wash the dishes. Just knowing that it's not weird to feel that way.
Yeah.
I think in the past, like I would notice myself not feeling loved or like just like
Mhm.
not receiving the affection that was being given to me supposedly. And then once I learned about love languages, I was like,
Yeah.
this makes total sense.
Right. I
Like
understand this
I
so much more.
definitely enjoy hugs, but like let's clean first.
Yeah.
And then absolutely we can hug. so
Yes.
so I just love you like reflecting that. Like you guys felt that change. Oh, we are making time. Like
Mhm.
we're taking quality time, not just obviously, talking and texting and
Mhm.
having that kind of cerebral connection, but really being
Mhm.
together and spending that time just like nurtured your relationship.
Yeah, it's like it really has made a huge tangible difference,
Yeah.
and the love language thing is so real.
Yeah.
Like we are very different, very 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 different in how we express things. Like I am a very touchy feely person. Like I want my partner to be touching me all the time, like hugging, holding my hands, all that other stuff. He is not that person. To him, if no one ever touched him, he would never notice.
Yeah.
And that's just the way he is. It's just his is acts of service.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like he will do everything for you.
Oh my God, he and I should get married. I'm like, that sounds great. See, same. Acts of service and like, don't touch me. That's amazing. But I think it's because I have so many children that I'm
Possibly,
like, people
yeah.
are touching me all the time. So
Right.
I think I would notice if no one touched me, but
Yeah.
because 3 people touch me constantly, at least, I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah. I mean, and it's amazing, like, when you think about the way that he processes things, like, to me, I would be like terribly hurt if no one ever touched me.
Right.
But he also listens to me in that too. Like, this is not something he thinks about doing, but because I asked and I said, this is what I need. He
Yeah.
does it on purpose. Like, he
Yeah.
makes it a thing. And like with me, like I know he is an acts of service person. So it means more for him. Like if I come up on my lunch break and empty the dishwasher,
Yeah.
he notices. He's like, he brings me flowers. He's like, this is the
Aw.
greatest thing. You empty the dishwasher. I'm like,
Yes.
this is awesome.
Love languages totally change the world.
It's like-
It's so important because yes, that's exactly it. It's like you might just think the dishwasher is a chore. So you might still do it half the time, but you're not thinking, oh, I'm doing this because I love my husband.
Yeah.
But once you realize that it feels to him like a hug,
Yeah.
then when you do it, it's not just the dishes getting put away, which everyone wins when that
Right.
happens.
Absolutely.
But you also get the satisfaction of knowing that you basically just hugged him and everybody wins again.
Right.
Yeah,
That's good.
love languages. They're really helpful. Shout out to, I don't actually know the name of the guy that wrote that book.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's a book. I think it's a guy.
Right.
But whoever it was, thank you, sir or madam. I
Right.
think it was a sir.
It's a very helpful tool. in
It's a
thinking
very
about
helpful
things.
tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
That's not to say that I'm good with love languages all the time.
Oh my gosh,
mea culpa
no.
because I know he's going to hear this.
Trust.
We have to like.
We all have our days.
Yeah. Whew.
And on the
It's a
days
work in
that you
progress.
don't empty the dishwasher, it's not because you don't love him.
Right.
Right. That's one of like the dangers of the love languages is like,
Right.
okay, but sweetie, like even though when I emptied it, it was out of love for you.
Right.
When I didn't empty it, it wasn't malice.
It wasn't malice. I just had 9 meetings in a row.
It was
It's
just
like,
a busy day.
Yeah.
Yes, they can be slippery, the love languages,
Yeah.
but still a useful framework, which we
Yeah.
appreciate. So you said earlier that you dropped all of your hobbies, but I'm calling you out because as long as I've known you, which now is many years, pre-COVID, I mean, I feel like we're at like a decade here.
At least. I
right?
think we'd have to be.
Yeah, I think it's a solid decade. You have maintained, I believe, a yearly pork roast, which takes your spirit of the South and your love of cooking and community, people gathering, and brings a lot of people together. I met a lot of fun people there. So tell me about roasting pork. Tell me about the tradition. the joy, the process, and why, even during your busiest times, that is something that you have maintained and was like the first thing to come back in the kind of post-COVID era. It was like the pork roast is back. And during COVID, you were delivering pork. You were pork at a distance.
Well, we actually had that whole, it was a fundraiser that we ran.
Right.
You know, the cookbook is still in process. It'll be out at some point.
Yes.
When we're finished editing. But, yeah, so it started, it's so funny. We jokingly, we call it the barbecue with a capital T. Because when this started, like, it had to have been like 2003, maybe. So I think it was 2004. This year will be the 20th year of the barbecue next spring.
The year I graduated high school. But wait,
I'm not
feel
that much
old.
older than you. I was just out of college at that point.
Okay,
so
good.
you know, by a few years. Okay. But yeah. So we were talking about, you know, I'm from the South, and a lot of the people that I knew here and that I worked with were talking about barbecue, and they were like, they would name these places that they would go to, and I'm not going to necessarily denigrate the old guard back then, but they're much better ones now. But they would say, "Oh, this barbecue is amazing," and I would look at them, and I would just have the one eyebrow, like, "What are you talking about? You're nuts! Like, what do you?" You know, and they'd be like, "What is good barbecue?" I'm like, "Actually, I haven't found any here, so shade for the DC area." And so that, you know, I've eventually had one friend who was super snarky, and he was like, "Well, you should just make some if you like. I think all of ours is terrible." And of course, my husband, who was familiar with my cooking, was like, "You should totally do that." You know, because if I say so myself, I am a pretty good cook. So that's one of my love languages. Speaking of that, is making food for people.
Yeah.
So because I also grew up with that. So yeah, right.
Very relatable.
Yeah, this is how we met. You know, one of many ways.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love cooking for people. I've long kind of maintained the idea that I want to have some sort of regular get together, maybe more regular even than the yearly thing. Where we have people just come as you are at any point. That's always been a rule at my house too. Like, if we're friends and I know you, like, if you need anything, show up at my door and you're fine. Like, it's the way that I love to exist in the world. And so I decided to have a barbecue, right? So I decided to learn how to smoke pork. And so I did all the research, you know, and like, what do we use for this? And got an oil barrel smoker with a side box, for those of you that are barbecue aficionados. That was coal fired, and so worked it out. Made a few rounds, you know. And to be fair, if you do pulled pork, it's not all that difficult. You just have to be patient, I think. But so I did it, and we decided to have a little party. We would have a couple people over. We was like, okay, we're gonna do a couple of, you know, pork shoulder cuts, you know, and invite about, like, I don't know, 15 people, 20 people. And so we came, the barbecue went away like that. I mean, it was gone. And everybody just was talking about it incessantly after that. Incessantly. When are you going to do another barbecue? When are you going to do it again? When are you going to do it again? And so we decided, okay, well, we're just going to have one maybe the same time next year. We'll just plan, we'll invite more people, and people can invite people. So the first year was 20 people. Second year was like 100 people. The third year was like 200 people. And this past year, when we had it, it was back for the first time after COVID. Over the course of the day, it was 350 people. So, and up to before COVID, it was about that. I mean, and so this is the kind of event where it happens in the afternoon. We say it starts at a certain time, but people kind of know they can show up before. Not all the food will be ready, but by, you know, mid-afternoon, and then it goes into the night. And we have people come, because most of my community is musicians. There are people that come kind of before their gigs and after their gigs, between their gigs, you know. So we have people all night, and it's a different stream of people throughout the whole thing. And it's become one of the big events for a lot of people that I know. I mean, not to brag, but I have people that will call me and find out when it's going to be if they're not sure, so they can plan their vacations. And then
it's official. It's now a DC institution.
Well, and it's really funny. Like, so when we were sitting down and talking about this fundraiser that I did, you know, a couple of years ago, we were talking about, like, what exactly is the impact of this event? Like, you know, I know that for a fact, even before this, I knew that there are at least 3 marriages that are because of this event. They met there. There are, and from those marriages, there are now 7 children in the world. There are, I think the conservative estimate that one of my friends put up is probably $1 million in gig work that has been arranged at the barbecue between people. And, and that's a lot for musicians. And you think about 350 musicians in the DC area. That's not all musicians, but mostly. That's a lot of connections for people, and mostly what I do at the barbecue is I'm just like putting out pork and talking to people. Oh, and you should talk to this person. And, oh, have you met this person? Talk to each other. I never get to talk to anyone at my own event, but everybody else gets to talk to each other. So I have so many people that'll come back to me after that and said, I met this guy at the barbecue and now I'm doing this thing. Like there are people that have put together albums and bands and like all this other stuff. It's really cool. So, and that's all around sitting around the food, right? And so the funniest thing that did come out of the end of my first marriage, which, bless him, we grew in different ways and moved in different directions. But is that almost everyone, when they found out we were getting divorced, they're like, are you still having barbecue? Like,
who gets to keep the pork?
The barbecue? And I was
who
like,
kept the smoker?
I was like, we're good. It's still going to be happening. It's excellent. And, so it has continued. And now my husband has now contributed his recipes to it. It's become this, it's morphed into these different phases of things.
A blended family.
A blended family.
Your smoker, his recipes. It's beautiful.
That's totally true. Like, oh my gosh. And that was like the one thing when you split up all your stuff when you get divorced. It's like, I'm keeping the smoker.
Keeping this goddamn smoker.
Smoker and the cats and the piano.
Right. Bless you, but the piano and the smoker and the cats, they're mine.
Right.
It's good to know what you care about, you know? Priorities. So that's all amazing. And I am so glad that we got to pork because it was on my original list. I'm like, we have to talk about pork. I won't press you for a recipe because I know barbecue secrets can be, Well,
I can give you the redux.
Okay, real quick. If someone wants to have a perfect pork, so you hinted that the most important ingredient is patience.
Oh, 100%. So, and if we need to on your podcast page, we can.
Oh my God, we'll put it down below.
I have a blog. We have a whole
thing. Oh my God, we'll link to the pork blog. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, good. This is going in a great direction.
Right, it's fabulous. There will actually be a cookbook. I'm not trying to shill it, but we're hoping that it will come out first of the year because this has been a thing.
Yeah.
So, and I'll talk about that a little bit because I mentioned it a couple times. I feel like I should explain it.
Yeah, we'll also link to that.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, that'll be fabulous. So pulled pork is actually kind of a shockingly easy thing to do if, like I said, the main ingredient is patience. Like you hear when people talk about barbecue, the words that people always say are low and slow, right? And people are afraid of that because they're going like, why am I cooking something at 250 degrees? Isn't it going to like go bad? And what's happening? No, there's magic involved.
It's going to go good.
It's going to go so good. So when anytime you cook something that's smoked, the smoke layer, when you put it in, you're cooking it at a really low temperature on purpose because you don't want the outer layer of meat to become so dried out that smoke flavor can't penetrate the meat.
Right.
So you have to put it in and just let it sit there. Like, don't mess with it. Like, don't fool with it. You don't have to put anything on it. You don't have to mess with anything. So what I do when I cook a pulled pork shoulder, there are 2 cuts you can get from a pork shoulder. One of them is the pork picnic and the other is the pork butt. Either of them work.
Both charming names.
Charming names, absolutely. There was a very funny Instagram where I was like putting the rub on it. The rub is the spices that you put on the thing, and I'm like spanking it, and my husband's laughing. He's like, "You're spanking the pork butt." It's terrible.
Yes.
So, so what you do is you basically put a little spice on the outside of the meat, and then you want the meat to just like hang out in this like smoky environment, smoky warm environment, because the smoke that you're putting in there from the wood chips and things actually reacts with some of the compounds in the meat, and it creates what's called a smoke ring. It creates this, I forget the chemical. I did all this research for the book. That the mark of the skill of a good smoker is how far the smoke ring goes into the meat. So in a good one, you can get like 1/4 to 1/2 inch into the meat itself. And you'll see it because it'll be like reddish pink.
Yeah.
And that's really just a product of sitting there. So you put the pork roast, if you want to do it, you can do it in the oven. You can do it, I do it in like a grill. And all you need is like a pan to put your pork roast in. And no water, no extra stuff in there. You just put the pork roast with the spices. It's full of water itself and juice. And then you put a little box on the side with some wood chips or something in it that's not directly over the fire. So it gets hot, but it doesn't burn. And that's what makes the smoke. So you can do that in a regular grill. Or like I have one where the firebox is on the side and it makes more smoke. But I do like 6 pork butts at a time.
Yeah.
So, and you do that and you just leave it. You just kind of maintain the heat it can be easier if you have something like a gas grill.
Yeah.
But for like 4 or 6 hours. And then you can leave it on there for the whole process if you want. But I don't. I take it out after the smoke ring usually is formed by then. And you take it out, wrap it up in foil, put it in your oven on that same temperature. You're aiming to keep it at like right at like between 225 and 250, the temperature of the grill. Because it's 215 is the magic number. So for the outside of the pork.
Okay.
So then you put that in the oven and you just leave it. I literally leave my oven on overnight till the same time that I put it in the grill, 24 hours. And you open up that foil. When you take it off the grill, it's this kind of like, it looks like sort of cooked on the outside, and it's really hefty and substantial, and it's like, you're like, that's massive. And you put it in this pan, again, no liquid or anything else in there, and you just let it go till the meat itself comes up to about 208 or 210 degrees if you use a meat thermometer. You'll open up the foil in the morning, and there will just be this like liquid sea of like pork fat and juice. And the meat, like if you literally just poke it with a finger, it'll go and just fall off the bone.
Wow.
That's literally all there is to it.
That's it.
You know.
Now I'm hungry.
Patience. I know. I should have brought you some.
And I have a brisket in my fridge.
Oh.
So
Brisket is a whole other skill set.
there is slow meat in my future.
Yeah.
But I really want to introduce you to, last year I discovered a local farmer. Shout out to Carl at Purifying Pastures.
Yeah.
He, it's about like an hour west. And he and his wife have a farm, all pasture raised, and they raise pork that they only feed fruit.
Get out.
So most pork are
amazing.
corn fed,
Yeah.
because it's cheap.
Yeah.
But their pork are fruit fed, and their pigs also drink some organic pasture raised raw milk.
Amazing.
So it's like the most pampered pigs.
Yeah.
But they did that because the wife is a nutritionist and she wanted to make the pigs as healthy as possible. So she just figured out how to feed these pigs. And they have these super healthy, happy pigs that are living the life. I mean, fruit and milk and living the dream. And he delivers to the DMV. He comes in and he brings us all our meat and eggs every Friday. So thank you, Carl.
Oh.
You're the best.
I look forward to getting in touch with Carl.
Yeah, you guys should totally hang. You guys, and he totally is like a community person too. So absolutely making connections.
Amazing.
Over food.
Love this.
As usual. Okay, I will now swing way back.
Pendulum.
Because you mentioned briefly switching to a 9-to-5 during/post pandemic. But it's not just that you switched to a 9-to-5. You, ironically or funnily or perfectly, switched to a career in public health.
I did.
During the pandemic. So many people never wanted to hear about pandemics again. And you were like, not me. I want to think about them every day.
All
so
the time.
Tell me about that switch from gigging and teaching to working in the field of public health at a public health department in data, in big data. Tell me about that switch.
So it was really interesting. I've always been involved in some kinds of, IT coding work. I've designed websites. I've done a lot of other things. But it never really, you kind of have the idea, well, like, this is something I could do if I really wanted to, if I wanted to do it more than I like doing this other thing. And, I'm doing music and I'm having a good time. And like a lot of people, when the COVID pandemic hit, of course, that whole line of performance was gone. And I've never been a person, I think there are a lot of people that when they go into performance, they do that for the joy of being on stage and being seen by people. My thing is that I just love doing collaborative music. I can do it in my own basement with other people recording or whatever. It doesn't really bother me, and I'm not there for the people cheering for me. In fact, I'd rather be in a pit where no one can see me when I play. I'm primarily a theater musician now. So, for me, I was kind of like, oh, this is terrible. Now I'm not playing these big shows with halls full of people. That's tricky, right? And I started kind of thinking about like, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to come back. We're just going to kind of tread water until. And while I'm treading water, I'm watching all this data go by. And I am one of those awful people that like loves to argue on the internet about things, but I love facts. And so I would be looking up, people would be making all these wild accusations about,
you like facts on the internet? That's not what the internet's for.
No, it's really not. Like they're facts and the internet, they seem
terrible
completely
combination.
incompatible.
Yeah.
But I would get really like really bugged because I've had healthcare on the brain for a long time, which is one thing I know that you know about me, that I have type 1 diabetes. I have to keep very good data on myself,
Right.
And I've been very interested in, how a lot of that data comes through. And so during the pandemic, I was sort of looking at different things, and I got really into the idea of how are we figuring out, like, how many people were sick and where, and like where were these metrics coming from. And you started seeing that they were really having to pull these systems together really quickly. And really during the pandemic, I mean, there was that article that came out, what was it, a decade ago, that said like data scientist is the sexiest job title or whatever. But in public health, like the real rise of that, honestly, you see the pandemic really putting the fuel behind it, because the CDC and the grants and the funding from the government is now working through building a lot of the infrastructure we've always wished we had.
Right.
And and I should state for the record, so I work for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. I'm in the say the acronym right, the Acute Communicable Disease Control and Prevention Epidemiology and Data Unit. I'm on the Data Science and System team.
Have they thought of a better title? It just seems very wordy.
It's a lot of acronyms, but we just love that it's ACDC, so we can repurpose the band t-shirts.
That is good.
So it's
that
fabulous.
Is good. Yeah.
I have so many fabulous ACDC shirts now. But not that I didn't love the band; they're great too. But anyway, so this is my version and my vision of it, but not theirs necessarily. But
sure.
But it's interesting because when I went into data science, it was not particularly to go into public health. I was literally looking for a tech career that I could leverage a lot of the skills that I had in music. I've been a music administrator forever. I've done a lot of marketing. I've done a lot of building websites. I did a lot of traffic data, like who's looking at what, like how do we market things like that. And I used a lot of the tools that people use for data science in doing that. And when during the pandemic, I had someone I knew basically said, you should look at a career as a data scientist. And I was like, what? And they said, yeah, I've been working on this project, and I basically have been working with 20 of you for 2 weeks. It's your brain exactly. Like, if you haven't looked at this, you need to look at it. So I kind of looked into it, and I thought, man, this is great. It's all the coding stuff that I love, and all the data and facts, and taking, how do we make use of what we know and putting it together. And I remember at the time when I started studying data science, I had the thought, because I've been looking at all the COVID data, man, it'd be great to be working on something like this, like all this pandemic data. By the time I get into it, though, I'll probably be working for somebody else, like a bank or some large media company or something. And I got very, very, very lucky. Speaking of community and connections, a friend of mine who is a musician, we were both looking for jobs at the same time. We were kind of looking for different things. I had come out of this data science training program and was looking for a job. And her roommate from college at music school was hiring on this team that I'm on now. And she said, you should talk to her because she's a musician, and I know that all the things that you can do, you could use in this job. And I had the project in the background, that I could show that I knew how to do this stuff. And I talked to her, and I was like, frankly, I'm looking at the job, and I'm like, this is not any of the stuff that I trained to do. And I've never actually thought about a job in public health. And then she started talking to me about what they were doing. And I was like, okay, first of all, this is fascinating. And second of all, what? This is awesome. It's, this is great, because what was happening is a lot of the things that are happening in different areas of public health now is that the systems that were kind of cobbled together quickly during COVID to bring this data to people are now being built out as robust, replicable systems that can be used for everything. So not just COVID. The systems that people put in place for COVID, now it's every kind of disease you can think of. And so...
and thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Because we needed those systems that data all along.
Right.
But it's always good to have a reason.
Right. Thank goodness for funding. No one wants a pandemic. Maybe we can make something good out of it at the end.
Exactly.
Right? So it's amazing because the work that I do there, my team is really phenomenal. They were this teeny tiny little team of data engineers that put all this together, data engineers and data scientists that put together this whole system that has run this whole COVID pipeline, get this data to where it makes a difference and how people can use it. And now we're kind of expanding it to this much larger system. So I am sitting there in the room helping everybody build the next generation of public health data infrastructure.
That's
And
awesome.
Dream job. Can't even lie. I mean, this would have been my dream job.
Yeah.
And I did not even know what it was when I looked at it at first. And now that's what it is. So.
Yes. So I have to say to that person who looked at you and said, I'm working with 20 people that have exactly your brain. Like, thank God for the people who see us like that.
Yeah.
Because that's how I ended up in public health, is I had no idea what I wanted to do next with my life. Mm-hmm. And I just literally woke up from a dream that told me to call my friend Trina and ask her.
Amazing.
And I called her and I was like, can you get coffee with me? I got to ask you what to do with my life. So we did. And at the time I thought, I'm such a weirdo. Like, I'm passionate about nutrition. I really care about food allergies. I really care about autoimmune disease. And I really care about like the food supply and improving it, eating organic. I'm a chef. I care about cooking. I care about teaching kids how to cook. I care about healthy food. I care about disease prevention. And I love managing systems and people and businesses. Too bad those things don't overlap anywhere, Like, I have no idea what I would do because there's just nowhere for a person like me who enjoys both health and nutrition and wellness, but also like systems management and like business and people. Oh, well, And then, this person in my life just saw me and said, you belong in public health. All the things you care about, that's public health. And I was like, what the heck is public health? Who's even ever heard of that? It's 2019. The public health doesn't exist. So it was that kind of moment, like like your friend saying, the people that I work with, their brains are just like yours. And you're like, really? Me? Like this data nerd who like plays music, but like knows how to do like search engine optimization or whatever.
Right.
Like, I thought I was just a weirdo, like, outlier. There's a place where there are people like me. I just so appreciate the people in our lives who see us and who are willing to tell us. And it's a good reminder to all of us to be that person for others. Like, when you see someone and it's so obvious to you what their gifts are, maybe don't just assume that they know. Like, let people know that you see their gifts, because people don't always know what their own gifts are, or they just think, oh yeah, like I like that, but it's
just a thing I do.
It's a thing I do. It's no big deal, right? It's good to reflect back at people how amazing they are, and it might help them reframe what they care about and find their dream job that they could never possibly have known to apply for.
Yeah.
And also bless the network where the roommate or the musician and the friend, and you're working on a team, and boom.
Yeah.
Magic.
Amazing. Like, completely fabulous. I mean, what you're saying is really, it's such a big deal, because that's one of the things that I'm a huge believer in, that no one is just one thing.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that is very problematic about being a musician. This is a soapbox of mine, even with especially with my students too, my music students.
Bring on the soapbox.
Bring on the soapbox.
Yes.
That nobody is one thing, right?
Yeah.
Where a lot of people are told as musicians that you have to spend your entire life focusing on the one thing, and this is what's going to make you excellent at what you do. I'll be honest with you, the best musicians I've ever worked with are not the ones that professionals that do it every day. They're the people that work for the Hopkins Physics Lab as a rocket scientist, or NASA as a security engineer, or a chemical scientist over here, or a doctor over here, or a teacher over here doing teaching chemistry.
Yeah.
And it brings such a bigger diversity to the way that people think about the music and what they're communicating. And I find it really problematic in music too, that there is so much teaching that is focused on, you have to devote the entirety of yourself, and not so much that, but the fact that if you don't devote the entirety of yourself to that, you're somehow less.
Right.
I can't tell you how many people, when I left music, I can't even say that.
She says gigging
with quotes,
many days a week still.
Gigging. But when I left music, like, and I never said I was leaving. That's the other thing. I was like, I am starting a job in public health. Like, nowhere on any of my social media or anywhere else will you ever find anything where I said I was quitting.
Right. Retiring from music.
My best friends who are musicians were like, you're quitting? And I was like, who said that? Well, you're not going to do it full time. I'm like, who said I was quitting?
Right.
remember, I was working 90 hours a week.
Right.
40 of that's taken up. I have plenty of time to still do this.
Like, I'm still doing it full time. It's just one full-time
One
job
full-time-
now is
right.
music, and the other full-time job
Right.
is
I
in
have 2
public health.
full-time jobs instead of 9 part-time jobs.
Yes.
And it's interesting because there really so many of the people that I work with that I most enjoy working with are the people who have other things and do other things and are varied and interesting and have other interests outside of it. So like that's one thing I would also say to people, like when you have a passion and a love and a creative outlet, it doesn't have to be the only thing you do.
Right.
And so you were speaking to burnout before. I'm making the pivot now. I'm the guest and I'm making the pivot.
Yes, do it.
But speaking about burnout, that was another thing that I learned in COVID. We were talking about the frog in water, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize how burned down I was and how much energy I was using for that until it stopped.
Yeah.
And when it did stop, I realized how much energy I had left over on the other side that I was not using. So I was using all of this creative energy to do all these kinds of music, and I was involved in like everything, like so many different kinds of gigs. Then I was over here, and my whole half of my brain that was math and science and data and all that other stuff was just like, meh, like not really doing anything. It was like, okay, I'm over here being bored. Now it's balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Like I actually have balance in my life. People talk about work-life balance. I still work 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
But now I have brain balance. Joyfully. Really though, like when I leave like work at night, I go and I play a show and it's just a totally different brain space. I'm using totally different things that are complementary, and I wake up in the morning feeling excited because it's not being so tired of doing only one thing and having the other part like screaming over here like, why are you not using me?
Yeah.
So
a lot came up for me when you were saying that.
I
And
bet.
I just can't get to all of it, but I will say that when I was working as a personal chef, I love to cook. I could cook all day. If you just put me in the kitchen surrounded by fresh foods, I would cook all day and it would be a joy. It would never bother me. But it's very much a creative expression for me. I think it's very much, I like to think, how a musician feels while playing. I get to use different textures and I get to think about what I want to turn something into, how I want to express myself through this food and then share it with others to bring joy and light to their day. But when I was working as a personal chef, I had a few families who totally just wanted to pay me to do that, just food jazz all over their kitchen. Just like whatever I was feeling, beautiful fresh foods, whatever spoke to me at the grocery store, they were happy to have that. And then I had a couple families who, heaven forbid, asked me to cook something specific. And every time it was like, well, that's not what I want to do, And I had to confront the reality that I wasn't really meant to do food in that way. I love to do food. I love food. I loved owning my own restaurant when it was just designing a menu every day. And I loved running a restaurant when it was talking about and sharing beautiful food every day. But when it came to a place where somebody was asking me to cook a thing that I didn't know how to cook already and had to learn how to cook and then didn't really love to cook, I was like, ugh. And as you know, I'm married to a musician and, he's had that experience of he loves to play music. He loves playing many kinds of music, but sometimes you're being paid to play music you don't like. And that's not that fun.
Yes.
So that brings me back to something that you just kind of touched on, but you posted on Facebook maybe a month or so back. You posted very passionately about it. And you were just starting to say how it was based on a post that you had seen about how people shouldn't have to professionalize everything they love. So why is it important to you as a musician, person, woman, ? And teacher?
Yeah, so this Facebook post that I made was based on another post that this woman had made that was sort of talking about there's no need to do everything that you love as a profession. Like all your creative things don't have to turn into a money-making enterprise. And one of the things that I see a lot as a teacher is this idea that in order to become a professional musician, this is the way that we're taught kind of in formal music education, that there's a certain level of effort or accomplishment you have to reach that's required by being a professional. And if you're going to put in that effort, you're going to become a professional. And that's not necessarily true. Like in order to become a competent musician, you still have to have the same amount of effort, but can we maybe make it not about being a professional?
Right.
Is the way that I think about it. Because with my students, what I think about always is the idea that I don't care what they do with music later. I mean, it's not that I don't care, but whatever they decide to do with it is fine with me, because what I want to teach them and what I want them to be able to do when they leave my studio and when they leave my care as a teacher is to be a functional musician. Can you make the music you want to make in whatever situation you want to be in, however we get there? And, it's hard to kind of convince people, that it takes the same amount of practice to become a functional musician as it does a professional musician.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that as the first part of it. So, like I said, my goal is to create musicians, not professional musicians, right? So I have lots of students that have come out of things, and they know that it's fine for them to go do something else if they want to do something else as a job, and music will always be a part of what they do. But the other part of that is that there's this sort of stigma to when you're taking lessons or whatever, you're studying music, that like if you decide to drop music, that it becomes this like great weight on you, like you've decided to quit. And I hate that. I hate that so much. I don't like the word hate. That is one of the few things in my life that I will say that I hate with a burning passion, because we are all very different people. Not everybody is meant to be a professional musician. Not everybody is meant to, spend their life in the dedication that it takes to be at the level of performing the way that I have to perform and like your husband has to perform, and play this music that speaks to people. Now, that also, though, is that the most important part of music for people? Is getting up in front of people and doing it more important somehow than fulfilling that soul need of the person to make music? I believe that everyone is capable of making music in some way. And what I don't want people to have is that attached guilt of I stopped because I had to do something else. So I have a lot of students, and I wrote in this post, a lot about, I have a lot of students that come in and, they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I want to take lessons, but I have this basketball thing and I want to go do that. Or like, I want to do this, but I don't have time to practice. And I just want to do this, I have to go do this and I can only play like one time a week. Or, you have the kids that come in and they just don't want to be there. And their parents are just hell-bent on them actually being a musician, taking lessons because it's good for them. And yes, there is something to that. But also, when you decide to quit, I don't want them to carry that guilt of I have quit. Because more than anything else that anybody ever says to me when they find out I'm a musician and they're not what they consider to be a professional musician or a practicing musician, they say, oh, I used to play, but I never practiced. I'm so bad at it. And I'm like, I hate it. I wish I hadn't quit. I mean, we all hear this from so many people that we know.
Some of us say it.
But I read, there was something that Amanda Palmer wrote that really resonated with me. And it's the way I think about this with my students. When they quit, I always make an effort for their last lesson to be joyful. This is what you've learned. This is what you know how to do. If you want to sit down and learn how to play any of this stuff, now you know how to do these things. You just have to remember and reach back and pull it back out. It might take a little work if you forget it, but it's always there. You've learned how to do it. And I have students that have gone out of like high school or whatever. They go on to be like doctors or lawyers. I have this fantastic chemical engineering student who just graduated from Georgia Tech. I'm so proud of her. And is working in all kinds of like biostatistics and stuff. She's amazing. One of the most amazing pianists I've ever met. Wow. She's continued to play while she was in school, just as a way of having another way of being than what she's doing. But I also have students who have quit, before time, like they're too busy when they go into high school, or they, have a sport that they would rather be doing or something. So let that last lesson be joyful. You've learned how to do these things. I've given you the tools to be able to do this on your own, and you don't ever have to feel bad about stopping. So back to what I said about Amanda Palmer. She made a post, and it was about something totally different. It was about loss and grief, and but there was one line in there that stuck with me massively. I will not allow this chapter of your life to end in self-blame. And I believe this so much about music. I never want my students to walk away from what they're doing because they made a better choice for themselves and feel angry at themselves for stopping. Because what they were actually doing is making a choice that was more true to the people that they are. Do they really want to play basketball more than they want to play the saxophone? We don't have infinite time, right? We have to make choices about what we do. That's fine. If you're making a choice that's about something that you would rather do, make the choice joyfully. Like, I agree with that. I will not allow this chapter of your life to end in self-blame. You did not quit music because you're a terrible person. You quit because you chose to follow another path.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine.
Right.
And I believe that so much for so many people. You know, paths, as we know, are winding. It is not a dead stop. Like, I have a student that I love to talk about. He's one of my favorite examples. He just turned 90 this year. Speaking of public health, he's a very famous scientist.
Oh my gosh.
Who, I haven't asked him about talking about him, so I won't name him. But
mystery public health scientist. I'm excited. I'm
he's
inspired.
Yeah. So he's 90,
Yeah.
and he came to me probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. A clarinet student, you know, so at the age of 84, you know, and so he had an entire career in scientific disease and disease research and viral vector research, right?
Wow.
And one of the most highly quoted, best known scientists in his field, an entire career, and retired at 65 and decided he wanted to learn how to play clarinet.
Hell yeah.
And so he did. And he's been playing forever. And he's 90. And he played when he was in a dance band, when he was a kid. But thank God that he didn't by the end of it, when he was 65, go, well, I quit that and I feel bad about it. I'm never going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
He's come back to it. Like, we worked all last summer on the Copeland Clarinet Concerto, which is one of my like favorite pieces of music of all time.
Wow.
And he just like loves it so much. And you got to think, at 90, he's now been doing this for 25 years.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's insane. Like, you know, he's now been playing clarinet like almost as long as I have. You know, and it's like really longer when you think about when he was a kid.
Right.
But, you know, but he loves this so much and he puts the time in. But I love the fact that he did not carry it with him and he didn't allow it to drag him down, that he said no to go in another direction, because we would not have all the information that we have, the life-saving information we have, if he had decided he couldn't quit playing the clarinet.
Right. He had to be a professional clarinet player.
Right.
So that brings up two really meaningful things for me.
Mm-hmm.
The first is my dad, who played music as a kid and then quit for a variety of reasons, you know, academics, sports, whatever. And then had this incredible career in tech, you know, invented technologies that pretty much everyone in society uses every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was his passion. You know, he began computer programming at the beginning of computer programming. He was someone who was able to jump on that boat as it was leaving the dock for the very first time. So incredible timing, right? Definitely a valid reason not to prioritize music, perhaps. Had this incredible career, retired, and then fell back in love with music. Started taking voice lessons, joined choirs, and now, you know, he's retired, but his phone rings constantly all day because he's on the board of multiple choirs. He sings in multiple choirs. He just helped found a new choir. So music is a huge part of his life. And if he keeps this up, you know, until he's 90, yeah, he'll have a whole second career basically as a musician. But it's something that was only possible for him because he didn't do it in the first half of his life. So life is a winding path, and also something that I was repeated a lot when I was in nutrition school is the phrase, life is a long time. Because we hear it a lot. Life is short. Life is short. And it can be, for sure. None of us knows how short life will be. But life is also a long time. And if you reframe that and you think, yeah, right now, today, I want to play basketball more than I want to play clarinet.
Right.
But that doesn't preclude me from picking up a clarinet on a weekend when I'm in the mood to play. It doesn't mean that I have to stop. It doesn't mean that I can't become a semi-professional clarinet player when I'm 80.
Yeah.
You just never know. The other thing it brought up for me is my return to academia, because when you said your goal is to get your students to a level of functionality where they can make the music that they want to make, I don't believe that academia is the place for everyone. I don't think everyone has to go to college. I don't think everyone should, especially if they don't want to. For me, I dropped out. I had a kid. I did many things, and it was gnawing at me, and I really wanted to return. And I had a lot of people who cared about me and thought I was smart and great who said, you don't need college. And that's totally valid. But that piece of getting me to the place of functionality that would allow me to play the music that I wanted to play, I had things that I wanted to know about the immune system, about our food systems, about the way the health system works, that I really wasn't going to be able to get to on my own. I really needed to go back, and I just know my own personality. I'm someone that rises to the occasion when someone else is pushing me. I'm very self-directed. I mean, like, I work out every day. I do all kinds of things on my own. But when someone has a standard for me and they hold me to it, I rise. So it was important for me to go back to school to sort of professionalize knowledge.
Yeah.
Because it got me to the level of functionality to make the content, to be able to write the papers that made me feel good about me, for me. And so I think I love what you said about taking a student to the place of functionality where they can make the music that they want to make. Because maybe for some kids, that's like learning 4 chords on guitar so they can like write a ballad for their girlfriend, you know?
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of ways to express yourself and to be self-satisfied. And there doesn't have to be this like bar that we all reach for, so we're all the same all the time. And I know that I benefited from going back to school on my own terms because I remember being 17 in college and just being like, ugh, eye roll. And I never rolled my eyes when I was 31 in college. I was like front of the class. Like, do you guys know how cool learning is? Like, this is the best. Like, do you get what a privilege this is? And they couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
When you're 19, you have no idea what a privilege any of this is, right? It really takes time to understand that. So, that concept of let's get people proficient enough in things that it brings them joy, that they can make the work or the creative product or the expression from it. Like, let's teach people to cook to the level that they can make food that tastes good to them.
Yes, right.
And let's teach them to play music so they can express themselves through music. And let's teach them to write and read so they can read the books that they like, you know? Like, if I could still only read Lift the Flat books, I wouldn't be intellectually satisfied, right? But for my kids right now, like, well, my littlest, the other ones are beyond Lift the Flat, but for the littlest one, like, that's good enough for her today. She's not trying to read PubMed.
Right.
I mean, she might enjoy the content. Yeah.
Oh, right. I was about to say.
She might, but I'll just summarize for her for now. She can pick it up through me. It's totally fine. But yeah, so I totally love that. And I also was really moved by that Amanda Palmer quote, to not let you feel like you ended on a failure.
Well, and that's another thing. I mean, just hearing you talking, there's a little bit of a different angle to that too that relates to that as well. That I feel like that quote has so much in it because it speaks to our responsibility as teachers. Yeah. It speaks to our responsibility as communicators and not only collaborators, but, you know, also colleagues. Yeah. Whenever I have people who are working to become a better musician, a lot of times when they come out of like school or what have you, or they get to a certain level, they actually become my colleagues. We play gigs together. I mean, so it's you like work to have them be like joyful in the thing they want to be joyful in, so you can share that, right? You know, and there's some of that, like I have another whole series of soapbox about academia and why are we there anyway? You know, and with music particularly, what are we actually learning when we learn music? Are you learning to be a musician and to learn to express yourself? Or are you learning to check a series of boxes that need to keep somebody else's job? That's another different question. And like for me, like I could never stomach a job where I was in place to literally, you know, pipeline kids through to check boxes. It's like I would rather die. Yeah. You know, and there are many cases where that happens. I was fortunate that my teachers and many people that I know, you know, most of the teachers that I know in music, that's not the case. You know, but that whole idea of, you know, if you don't check the boxes, you come out of that with blame also. Like if you're not going to be the perfect classical musician or you choose to do something different, the blame that other people heap on you. And this is me, like this is my own set of therapy right here. Because, you know, when I pivoted into data science, that whole thing of people like, you're quitting. And I'm like, first of all, I never said that. And also I had many people that were my past mentors who were like, I can't believe you're quitting. And I was like, I never said that. And also we all do lots of things.
Right.
Like, we're not one thing. That was another Facebook post, I think.
Multitudes.
I contain multitudes.
Yeah.
Like, I have the capability to do all these things. And, like, this part of my life is richer because now I can communicate, this stuff as well. And, so it's that whole thing of, I will not allow this chapter in your life to end in self-blame. You are not allowed to blame yourself for being something different than what I want for myself or what I want for you or your parents want for you. It is your choice as a musician to express yourself the way that you need to. That is your intrinsic path for your own soul. And that's what I want them to follow.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. And I think it applies to so many things. I think it applies to all learning.
All learning. Yes, absolutely.
I think that we cannot tell people what their knowledge is supposed to do for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the focus should be getting knowledge to people, getting information, data, well structured, well cleaned, well visualized data to people, helping them to be, data proficient, data fluent, information fluent, so that they can actually access it and not just look at it and go, what's that pile of numbers and shapes? But then people are allowed to use information and knowledge and data to their own end and to do with it as they see fit and to express themselves as they see fit. And that's what life's all about. If there is free will, which I think there is, I can't be sure. There could be a puppet master and I will never know, or maybe I will one day. But right now I don't. So from this place of uncertainty, I say we have to let people take knowledge or music or talent and their gifts and do with them what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite series of books is there's a mentor in the book that, his thing that he passes on to his students is literally encapsulated in a quote, and it's, all knowledge is worth having.
Yes. Yes, it is.
I don't have a tattoo of it yet, but I'm going
to. I was just going to say, because I have my book quotes tattooed on me.
Yeah.
Up my arm here, it says, a purpose of human life, no matter who is controlling it, is to love whoever is around to be loved.
Yes. I love that so much.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes.
Kurt Vonnegut, I love you. Okay. Another wild swing, because otherwise we'll just do this forever. I'm full of them. So public health is a big passion of mine, passion of yours now. And there are many important topics in public health. And as I've talked about many times, public health is often not personalized enough. We talk about the data. We talk about the numbers. We say, X number of people died or X number of people were diagnosed. And then we don't actually zoom in to the people. So you now work in public health, but you have experienced the health system very intimately as a human, as an N of one, as an individual with personal experiences, because you have type 1 diabetes.
I do. Yeah.
So I want to chat a little bit about what it's like. First of all, the experience of being diagnosed and interacting with the healthcare system, maybe some of the challenges of being self-employed with a chronic illness.
Yeah.
And then I also would love to hear you reflect on, if you would, the experience of being a person with a chronic illness that is talked about in the public health sphere as a topic, but isn't necessarily focused on the people experiencing it and how it feels to experience that divide up close.
Yeah. Oh, so many thoughts on this. Let's see where to start. So yeah, it's interesting to think of, it's interesting to be a type 1 person who works in data and who works, especially in public health, because it's one of those diseases that people talk about. But of course, in the work that I do, of course, it's not as urgent. I don't hear about it in my particular day-to-day because it's not one of the ones that we track. But it's fascinating to hear, to think about how you have to navigate that as a human being, because the healthcare system that we have here is not designed to help the person. It's designed to help the average. And so, for instance, when I was diagnosed, I was at the time considered an anomaly. I was diagnosed when I was 23. I'm 46 now.
Oh wow! So that's the official halfway mark.
It is, right? Yeah. My dia birthday is on May 5th.
Wow.
I have an actual date.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I was diagnosed when I was, I take that back. Not quite. I was 24.
Okay.
But yeah, so, it's been like half my life I've dealt with it. But I also, kind of came into it as a person who did not fit the visual profile, and I didn't fit the age profile. So when they're looking at me and thinking type 1, like I said, what I just said a minute ago about it's not designed to cater to the person, it's designed to cater to the average. How fast can we diagnose somebody? What are the minimal tools we can use? And we're going to go on that instead of using the things that were designed to help figure out, what exactly this is. Because let's be honest, doctors don't have enough time to spend with their patients. And the system isn't designed in a way, to really allow that. And, bless all the doctors that do that, that sort of look at you and go, okay, what does this mean for you? Because I do have a very good team of doctors at this point that do that I've chosen for that reason on purpose. Being a self-employed person and a musician with type 1 is challenging, as I mentioned before, 90-hour work weeks.
Right.
Type 1 is one of those diseases where, for those of you that don't know about what type 1 is, basically your pancreas, it's an autoimmune disorder where your own body attacks the islet cells in your pancreas that produce insulin. So the major onset of it is that there's, your body has attacked those cells to the point where you're not making enough insulin to like kind of have your body uptake the nutrients and the things that it needs, which is glucose. And over time, it depends on the person, but most or all of those cells are destroyed.
Right.
So that means that you're going to be dependent on insulin for the rest of your life. There is no lifestyle. There's nothing that can change that because it is an essential, an essential substance that your body is not making that it needs.
Right.
So, so that means that you are now reliant on drug companies to provide you with the insulin. You're reliant on doctors for those prescriptions and for the diagnoses and to tell you what the right thing is to do and the right amount to use. And even though you have to manage it yourself. So, you can easily walk into a doctor's office and they say, okay, well, you're type 1, you have to eat breakfast at 7 in the morning. It has to be 30 grams of this and, 1 o'clock and then, lunch and a 5 o'clock dinner. And then you have like a peanut butter cracker before you go to bed and that's it. That's your life now. And if you're a musician and you don't work a 9-to-5 job, you look at that and you go, yeah, no, that's not going to be happening. And there are many
many
people.
Should I eat the peanut butter cracker before or after my gig that goes until 3 o'clock in the morning?
Right. Well, and there was, I have a funny story about that actually, because when I, you have that, and I've been very fortunate to have doctors, after my initial diagnosis. So this is to speak to that. There's a story about this that I feel is really relevant, and that's that idea of looking at the average, not the person. And when I was first diagnosed, they took a look at me, and if you're seeing the visual of me, I am about the same size now as I was when I was, first came down with type 1. So which is to say I'm a larger girl, which is fine. I've always been this size ever since I was a kid. It's not like I went and ate donuts and whatever. My mom was a complete Whole Foods, organic co-op, cooked everything herself nut. There was not a whole lot of, any junk anything in our lives. Or any unreasonable amounts. This is just my body type. I look like everybody in my family. And not because we eat crazily. We just all look like this. And so when they took one look at me, when I came into the emergency room, because what happens often when you have type 1 is there's some catastrophic event. They have to take you, you pass out or something. And they're like, oh, well, I had a doctor actually look at me and he goes, did you know you were diabetic? And of course, at the time, my father-in-law was a doctor, and I knew enough of being around. And I was like, no, I did not, sir. And I was so done. I was done because I was like, oh, this is how this is going to go? Oh, no, we're not having that. And I was like, no, I haven't. Thank you very much. And these are all the symptoms. Would you care to take a look at that? And I was really mad because they made the assumption that because I was bigger, that it was because I just was not taking care of myself.
Right.
And it's like, sir, I have just finished running 2 half marathons. Like at time, I have nothing for you. And so, and they weren't having it. They were like, you're type 2. We're just going to send you out of here. There's literally a 5-minute antibody test that could have told them that I was type 1 that they did not do. And so
they just diagnosed you based on blood sugar and they didn't actually
basically
look into the root cause.
No.
Wow.
And when they sent me out from there, they sent me out of there with no insulin prescription, no any of that stuff. And as a type 1 person, you're guaranteed you're going to crash out again. Right. So I was fortunate that not all of my islet cells were gone, or I would have been back in the, the hospital immediately. But, went to see my primary doctor, and he's like, this is not right. I want you to actually go see an endocrinologist and talk to them. The minute I walked in there, she looked at all of my lab things, and she was like, yeah, no, let me, can we like get your blood and do the test? And she like literally, they went out. The nurse came back in like 15 minutes later and was like, oh yeah, she's type 1. And I was like, oh, that's all that took. And I was in the hospital for 3 days over there as an uninsured person at the time. So, and they figured none of that out. I had no training on how to do any of these things, but they were looking at the average, not the person.
Wow.
And there's much to be said for that, thing you hear people talk about too, where if you are the person in the hospital, your voice is not heard nearly as much as it should be sitting in the bed, because they automatically discount what you're saying.
Right.
And, so I was fortunate that I had a fairly strong advocate in my former mother-in-law, who is a delightful person and a force of nature, and I miss her all the time. And she sort of was like, yeah, this is crap. We're not having this. So we were out of the hospital at a reasonable amount of time. She's like, well, you need to go see somebody else and talk to them. So anyway, as a person who was not insured, as a self-employed person, that is a hefty burden to put on people.
Yeah.
At the point when I was diagnosed, we were fortunate, we live in Maryland, that there was a program that was designed. It was the precursor to what we think of as to the Affordable Care Act, basically. Where if you had some sort of chronic disease, you could apply and get insurance through the state. Without that, I would have been completely toast. Because thank God for forward-seeing government and health policy. Because so I was able to get that, but even at that one hospital bill for the 3 days, like, put me underwater for a good 7 years.
Wow.
I mean, it was, and even then I fought to get them to not pay some of it because of the really shoddy job they'd done. But, so yeah, it's problematic, right? Because, as a self-employed person, then you go, okay, how do I coordinate all this care? As a type 1 person, I have a team of anywhere between 8 and 12 doctors that I have to see between 3 and 6 times a year. And so that's all those doctors, all those copays, all the insulin, which can be insanely expensive if you don't have insurance. Fortunately, there are programs that allow you to get it for relatively inexpensively. For instance, the one at Walmart, $25, you can get insulin no matter what happens. And I want everyone to know about that, because there's no need for anybody to die because they are rationing their insulin. There are ways you can get around that. So there are lots of programs too that help people with that as well. And that's another thing that I feel really passionately about, because I'm very thankful for the Affordable Care Act. It still has left a lot of people in the lurch. Yeah. And there's no need for anybody to die from diabetes from a drug that can be had for less than a cost of a reasonable dinner somewhere,
Yeah, well, maybe we can link in the show notes.
It would be great to
some
of those
are there
resources.
any like education nonprofits or places people can go to find that information?
To find that out.
Okay, great.
And it's an interesting kind of quandary, as when you sort of start looking at a disease that nobody really looks at because it's quote unquote manageable.
Right.
And there are ways that people are working on curing it, but it's also kind of, because of our health system, not in the interest of the people that are, providing the solutions to cure it, because they're making enormous amounts of money off of us.
Right.
So there's that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you've found a highly profitable management tool, it can be difficult to motivate the companies that would also be funding the discovery of something maybe better or safer,
right? Or
just like sort of healthier long-term, guarantee sustainable health long-term, not as many dangerous blood sugar swings or having to prick yourself many times a day.
Yeah.
Although the CGMs have
right.
changed the game a little bit
a
with
that.
Thing. Yes,
that.
You were flaunting your CGM
I was,
earlier.
in fact,
Do you want to highlight it?
Yes. Fabulous Dexcom with its dragon sticker.
Incredible.
This
so
is a game
cool.
changer.
Yeah.
Technology is always getting better for these sort of things. A lot of people that work with type 1 manage it using an insulin pump.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you hear a lot, all the diabetes commercials about pricking your finger and all that stuff, is the thing that like we don't have to do it anymore. Like it's, you know, a CGM is a continuous glucose monitor, and it basically takes your blood sugar every 5 minutes or so, like from wherever it is, and you can wear it for like 10 days or whatever, at least the one I have. And, you know, shout out Dexcom. Y'all are awesome.
So cool.
They have a new one coming out that you can wear for longer, so I'm excited about that. But, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, it's interesting to sort of talk about it and think of the tech as progressing, because it's no longer considered to be like, I'm not saying it's not dire and you don't have to manage it well, but it's not really the sort of death sentence that people used to think it was. If anybody ever watched that old episode of MASH, you know, where they find the pilot who has diabetes and they have to ground him immediately, is, you know, like, it's terrible, it's horrible, dangerous. You know, and the first time I saw that, I was like, really? That was a thing? And I started looking into like some of the things that used to happen, you know, like, you know, the things you were not allowed to do if you were type 1 that I now have not as many issues with, you know, so.
Yeah, my best friend, her uncle died from type 1 diabetes because he grew up in like a town where partying was common, and people saw him passed out in the street, and they just thought, you know, another passed out drunk, right? No one even thought to stop and help him. They just left him, and he just was having like a blood sugar coma.
Yeah.
So I think obviously it's still a difficult illness. Hopefully there's more compassion and education in the world in general, that if we see someone passed out, we would at least call someone. That just feels like especially dark, but it is really amazing how far we've come in terms of management. You know, my lens into this kind of thing is with food allergies. And when my daughter was born in 2006, her list of allergies meant that we basically couldn't buy anything packaged or dine out anywhere, because there just weren't options. There weren't gluten-free menus. There wasn't gluten-free bread. There was one gluten-free bread, and it was just terrible. Energy, and it came in this weird plastic, and it was crumbly and also bitter. It was just bad. And now, you know, you could be in Illinois or Ohio or somewhere, you know, far away from like the metropolitan, whatever, like New York City or like San Francisco, where you could probably get gluten-free stuff like 15 years ago. You can be anywhere now in the U.S. and go into a coffee shop, and they'll have an almond milk latte or an oat milk latte, and they'll have a gluten-free vegan cookie option. And it's just like, what? How did we get here? So shout out to the market for those innovations and for going after the cash, but in a way that has benefited many lives. And hopefully we can see the healthcare market continue to improve and shift. The Affordable Care Act, obviously, one of the most important things about it, maybe the most important thing, is the protection for people with chronic illness.
Absolutely.
Because
100%.
there are so many heartbreaking horror stories of people who were just, you know, born with a chronic illness or developed one in the middle of their life and were just shut out from the healthcare market. And I think as Americans, even though we do debate fiercely the healthcare conversation, if we have an entrepreneurial ideal, if we believe that the American dream is being able to take your talents and your hard work and turn them into something great, then it really allows a lot more people to do that if we have affordable healthcare.
Absolutely.
And there are many avenues into that and many things we need to work on, but protecting people with chronic illnesses that they did not choose and could not possibly have chosen and would definitely not choose if given the option.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I mean, happy to not choose anaphylactic food allergies. We'll just put those right back in the box. It's very important. And you know, I work in policy now. I definitely will always be working on policy and always wanting to make it better. But we have to take our wins where we have them and then try to pile bigger wins on top of those wins. So hopefully we can keep all of us in our own way working together to educate and advocate and improve.
Yeah.
Because everyone needs that.
Yeah. There's so many different varied experiences and different things that we don't see in other people too, like with chronic diseases, like, you know, the person next to you may have one, and you don't even know it at this
Right.
point. But that may be a person who could lose their job. Like, I feel passionate about this in data, for instance, because it is so important, like some of the data protections that we have in place for some of the stuff, because still it is, it's illegal to discriminate on based on some of those things, but it absolutely happens.
Right.
And, it's fascinating to see like how those regulations have changed and are changing, and what people are trying to put in place to make that more possible. And thank goodness for the Affordable Care Act too. There's parts of that affected that as well.
Yeah.
So
100%. So circling back again to stay with this, but to just reflect again on being a person who personally experiences a topic, but then is working in a space where that topic is coming up, but it's coming up in a numbers, in a data, in a generalized. Yeah. What's that like? Like, what's it like to be in rooms where sort of chronic illness, maybe quote unquote, is being thrown around, but they're not talking about the individual? And do you think that it's possible? Like, one of the things that I struggle with, and I ask everyone that I'm sort of close to help me figure this out, is how can we scale the personal, because it's challenging, because we are all different and certain things aren't scalable. But how can we shorten that distance between the data and the lived experience?
Yeah, that's a great question to think about, because, and granted, like I said, in my daily, I don't have to actually deal with the type 1 side of things, or chronic disease generally, at least not yet.
Yeah.
We'll see. See where the gig goes, right? But it's interesting to sort of think about, when you see numbers on a page, the graph seems like something. And, for my experience, I can come back to, the work that I do in communicable disease. Like, when we look at things like COVID numbers, so much of the pathway to scalability is being able to communicate to people that this is important, because that is a person.
Right.
And one of the reasons I was really passionate to get into healthcare data, and that first initial ping of like, wow, maybe I could work on this kind of epidemiology data, was because, and this is a shocking statistic for a lot of people, but I went to 77 virtual funerals during the COVID pandemic.
Oh my God.
And each one of those people was a person.
Yeah.
But that's less than a weekly count for most counties of the number of people that died. I know every single one of those people in my mind as a whole and physical person. So when I see, death counts of 500, 600, that to me, like, in my work and in my mind, I absolutely put my feeling of those people in that space. That is 500 people who are no longer on the earth because of this thing. How can I help fix that? And I think that is one of the things that in scalability, it's important. And some of these protections we were just talking about are also very important in terms of chronic disease. Because of some of the lack of protections that we've had, you haven't had a lot of people who are willing to talk about it when they have it. Right. Because it can impact their jobs. They can be fired. They can be kept from possible work. I know even as a freelancer and as a musician, there are situations where I can absolutely tell you I have not been hired because I have type 1 and I have to wear an insulin pump. And what if it beeps during the middle of a rehearsal or a recording? And I mean, I'm not irresponsible about it. I know how to manage it so it doesn't. But they have that in their mind, and it's not. Do they have that in writing? No, of course not, because they would get sued. But maybe not by me, but we also just kind of live with that so much that we don't even think about it, right? So, but the idea too that if you see that person as this is a person that has that, and yet look at what their life is like.
Right.
I feel like that's such a big help, because what people with chronic diseases are capable of doing so many things because of all the changes in technology, but we also need help in doing things. So like whenever I have a choice, like I'm the person that speaks out about it. Like, I'm that annoying person on the internet when somebody makes the joke about Wilford Brimley and the diabetes commercial. I'm like, shut up. I'm like, my friends hate this because they know they can't even make a joke about it. And I'm like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Can I direct you to this information source? And I don't ever want to hear you say this again. And it's this sort of, but also more helpfully, like whenever things have come out and there's been a lot of debate, on social media and other things, I try to make a point of putting a face to it. Like when somebody talks about like, well, why are we having all this stuff and paying for all this healthcare for people with chronic diseases? There was a lot of debate about that during the ACA roll up. And I literally made several posts and I'm like, when you talk about this and you're talking about, we don't want to pay for this, this is me that you are condemning to death. If this doesn't happen, I die, literally. And, you know, or this person cannot function in their daily life. It comes back to things like remote work and stuff like that too. How many people who have lived with chronic diseases and disabilities are now able to work a 9-to-5 job in a way that they couldn't before because they couldn't even get in the building, you know, but they're able to work remotely from home. It's a different question. It's like making that more human. People understand that when they know the person more intimately and they see the person, I feel like.
Yeah. That was beautiful. Everything you just said.
Thanks.
I really loved every bit of that.
How it exists like in my heart all the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing it because I agree with you. And I shared something recently on LinkedIn about knowing my why. I'm someone for whom motivation is really important. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Because the world is jacked up. And it's easy to go dark, you know? It's easy to go, gosh, darn it. Like, what the heck? Why am I trying so hard? But I have 3 reasons every day that I know them inside and out, and I know what they're capable of, and I know why I want to make the world better and safer. And I know many other people that I want to help too, but those 3 are really it for me. You know, that's like jump in front of a bus kind of level of why. And so what you just said about, you know, knowing people up close and taking that intimate experience of the people that you know and trying to make sure that you hang on to those feelings when you're looking at a data set so you don't go numb to the numbers. Because numbers can be numbing. And it can be a way that we distance ourselves.
And as humans too, we have a really bad ability to conceptualize large numbers too. There's some metric that somebody quotes as above a certain amount, like we really can't even conceive what that means.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and of course, like as we all know, during COVID, the numbers were so big that you go, well, that's obviously a number I can't even picture. So, moving right along. Or sometimes the numbers are shockingly small. Like the other day I saw something like talking about dietitians and it said something like of the 75,000 registered dietitians in the U.S. And I was like, what?
You're what? Like there's only that many?
We only like
what?
And I know half of them? Like how is this possible? I swear to God, I know like 50,000 dietitians.
A large double-digit percentage are my friends on LinkedIn. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But is it true? Like I'm going to have to go back to it. But sometimes numbers can be shockingly small when you think about how many people in this country and would benefit from a dietetics intervention, right? Or like a consultation or having a dietitian in their doctor's office to do a secondary follow-up with them. Like, do we really only have that many?
Only that many, really?
So we're going to have to look into that. But I really love what you said. And I think I just want to say it again. Like, think about the people that you know and think about those feelings that you have for them. And remember that every single number in a data set about people is a person like that. And that's how we can make public health more personal. Yeah. Katie, I want to thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. And I know that we could talk all day long. We're going to have to hang out again.
Clearly.
Not on camera.
Right.
Maybe on camera again, too. But in closing, yes, she's here for it all. She's down. But in closing, I have to know, because earlier, before we began recording, my 5-year-old was reading to us about bugs. And it turns out that you love spiders.
It's true.
So I need to know, in conclusion, why do you love spiders?
Oh, man, this is such a great story. I love this story so much. So when I was teaching in the studio where I used to work, there was a bay window next to my chair. And, you know, I'm living and working in Northern Virginia. There, you know, it had a beautiful piano and I was sitting there, I had my chair and my lamp. And I looked outside the window one day when I got there to teach, and there was a huge spider that had made a web across the window. If you know anything about them, it was a species of orb weaver that we have here in DMV area that is kind of, they have red and black legs and a big round body. If you live here, you've probably seen them. They make webs, especially in the fall near the turning from summer to fall. And they make really big, really robust webs across walkways. So people hate them because they're, if you walk into them, you turn instantly into a martial arts expert and try to get them off of you, even if they're no longer there. Anyway, so she had made this enormous web across my window. And it was kind of midway through the summer. And so if you know anything about orb weavers, they are very poetically perfect spiders for what we think of with their webs. They make these large webs with all these spokes. And what they do, the reason they're called orb weavers, is because they take their webs, and when they're done with them, they ball them up and they throw them away in these little balls of silk. And then they make a new web. And they do that every day. When they are going to make a web, they do it about, early afternoon, because they use the light from, that's why they make webs across walkways and things. They use a light behind them to lure the bugs into their webs. They're very smart. So she was using my lamp in my window to lure the bugs toward her web. And so I would see her make her web, and I was like, this is so cool, because I was sitting there and she was about maybe 18 inches from my face on the other side of the window. And so I could see her hanging there. I'd tap on the window and she'd vibrate the web a little bit. She was huge. She's about this, a little bigger than a quarter, with her legs all out. And so she was there every day when I was teaching. I taught every day at this studio. And I would see her every day make her web and spin it and catch her prey. And then she'd caught some different things. By the time I was done teaching at night, she would go up into the little corner of the window and stay there. And I watched this for like 2 months, every single day. And so I called her Eleanor because, as we're bringing it back to Beatles, I play in a Beatles band. And,
of course.
Eleanor Rigby sits in the window. Yeah. So I named her Eleanor, and I watched her every day. And those kind of spiders, when it turns cold at the end of the year, that's the end of their lifespan. They die. They leave an egg sac that hatches out to become their offspring in the next year. And I found myself unable to ever look at the spider the same way, because I had spent so much time watching her at a remove right there. It was impossible for me to be scared of them anymore because they were right there. And I sort of became fascinated with bugs. So fast forward to a little longer after that, I had been, Facebook has a lot of great groups, and I joined one about bugs. One of my friends had started one where you would post the bugs near where you are and like ask, what are they? What is this thing? And the rule is you couldn't talk about a bug. You couldn't do that thing that we talk about where we're like, oh, burn it with fire, kill it. But you had to be inquisitive about it and curious and not kill it. And the first tenet of this group was a poem by Nikki Giovanni, which I absolutely love. It's life-changing for me. It's called Allowables. If you don't mind, I'll read it.
Please do.
So this is Allowables by Nikki Giovanni. I killed a spider, not a murderous brown recluse, not even a black widow, and if truth were told, this was only a small sort of papery spider who should have run when I picked up the book, but she didn't, and she scared me, and I smashed her. I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I am frightened.
Yeah, that got me.
Yeah, I love that poem. Makes me cry every time I read it.
Yeah.
So
it made me cry to hear it. We saved the tears for the end.
So as a result, I now know way too much about spiders, and I love them. And every time I encounter someone who's afraid of them, I encourage them to look at them. There are, in fact, only 3 medically significant spiders in the U.S. So if you encounter one, it will not hurt you. It is probably more scared of you than you are of it. And if you let it go on its way, it'll do its own thing. So
I also love and want to end on, and might have to make T-shirts of, the metaphor of building something as beautiful and as intricate and as perfectly located as a spider's web, and then just balling it up and throwing it away.
Right.
Like, let's all do that.
Right.
With our art, with our academic writing, with our creations that are so precious to us. Let's just live in the habit of doing the best that we can, as if catching our food depends on it. And then every day, just ball it up.
Right.
Throw it away.
Do our next best work.
And do the next best thing.
Right. And hope that people have grace for us like we have for our spider friends.
Yes, and continue on our winding path.
That's right.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for coming. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to
Thank
have you as a
for having me.
friend.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you were down to join me for this conversation, and that you shared everything that you shared.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been really enjoyable.
It was my pleasure. Thank you again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast. For more information on today's guest, Katie Ravenwood, or any of the resources or poems mentioned on today's podcast, please visit the show notes. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Informed Solutions Consulting. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.